First Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, Task Force Green, and the Unit. These are just a few names given to the Delta Force, an elite U.S. Special Operations unit only deployed for the most complicated, high-risk, and top-secret missions. Many details of Delta Force's operations are highly classified. Even details such as the current size of the unit and its current commander are kept shrouded in secrecy. Even the Pentagon refuses to officially acknowledge their existence. Today, we're cracking open the files and taking a look at everything we know about the origins and operations of the mysterious Delta Force, and what makes them America's most elite counter-terrorist special operations task force. Extensive involvement in the last 3 decades of Middle Eastern conflict have put these hardcore super soldiers on the map, though very few people could really point them out. Delta Force soldiers are the best of the best and only work with that same standard of equipment and weaponry. If Delta Force wants you dead, we hope you've got your affairs in order, because these human bloodhounds always get their mark. But with one of the largest and most well-funded militaries in the world, why does the US Army feel the need for such a terrifyingly specialized unit of elite warriors? Let's go back to the 1970s for a moment, a decade of change that saw Richard Nixon impeached from his role as president after the Watergate scandal. Rock bands like Queen and the Rolling Stones dominated the radio airwaves, and King of Rock and Roll Elvis Presley dies at the age of 42 in his Graceland home. The 1970s also saw the birth of what some refer to as contemporary terrorism. Incidents involving violent attacks on innocent people by terrorist groups skyrocketed, with 9,845 recorded terrorist incidents occurring across the world during the decade. Of this number, 1,470 took place on U.S. soil, costing the lives of 184 innocent people. The tactics being employed by terrorists during the 70s were expanding, with methods of attack ranging from bombings, kidnappings, and armed assaults to hijacking airlines, assassinations, and hostage situations. By the mid-70s, the number of U.S. bombings orchestrated by terrorists were averaging between 50 and 60 per year. It was also at this time that airline hijackings and bombings were taking place at least once a month worldwide. Like we said before, it was a decade of change. But what does this have to do with Delta Force, you may ask? Well, everything. In 1977, the U.S. government established Delta Force as a direct response to the rampant acts of terrorism that were occurring during the 70s. Charles Beckwith, an officer with the U.S. Green Berets and Vietnam War veteran, is the man remembered for founding Delta Force. Beckwith had served for a time as an exchange officer with Britain's Special Air Service, better known as the SAS. An exchange officer is exactly what you might expect. Think of an exchange student briefly visiting a school in another country. Except instead of a school, it's a highly trained, specialized branch of another country's military. Upon returning to America after his time with the SAS, Beckwith compiled a highly detailed report that emphasized the need for a similar SAS-style unit within the U.S. Army, stating that their army was potentially vulnerable without a unit of this nature. He spoke to key government and military figures, pushing the need for not only teachers but doers. However, the idea was frowned upon and ultimately rejected. That was until the rising threat of terrorism that presented itself during the 1970s. The Pentagon and U.S. Army tasked Charles Beckwith with the formation of the unit in the mid-70s, when terrorist attacks were on an unprecedented rise. Inspired by the work of the SAS, Beckwith envisioned small teams of highly skilled and totally adaptable troops that possessed a vast array of specialized skills that would make them ideal for carrying out counterterrorism missions. His ultimate goal was for his unit to be what the SAS were to the British Army, but instead carrying out their operations on behalf of the U.S. Army and government. According to Beckwith, the proposed unit would have provided a high specialized force, rich in rank structure built upon small teams which contain mature, professionally trained, psychologically prepared individuals capable of making on-the-spot judgments. He was a 1970s Nick Fury, given the resources and mandate to assemble his own team of military Avengers. In 1979, after Beckwith had spent time rigorously screening and training volunteers for his new unit, Delta Force was certified mission-ready just before the infamous Iran hostage crisis that took place that same year. On November 4th, in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, Iran, a number of United States diplomats were trapped when supporters of the Iranian Revolution had laid siege to the embassy. This incident will sound familiar to any of you that have watched the 2012 Academy Award-winning movie Argo, starring Ben Affleck, as this is the event that the movie derives its plot from, although it was criticized for a number of historical inaccuracies. Saving the hostages trapped in Iran was set to be Delta Force's first ever high-profile engagement, codenamed Operation Eagle Claw. However, the mission, which would have involved Delta Force storming the embassy and securing the hostages by force, was aborted due to technical problems with the team's helicopters. In hindsight, the mission's cancellation may have been for the best, as Delta Force kicking down the doors of the embassy during a time of high political tension in Iran might have exacerbated matters, and ultimately the hostages were returned safely to the US, so there was still a happy ending. However, it forced the US Army to reconsider a few things before they started deploying Delta Force on its missions. After some reshuffling, the US Army established various units that would specialize in missions with specific requirements to take some of the pressure off Delta Force. For example, the Night Stalkers, designed for missions involving air support, and the famous SEAL Team 6, created to handle counterterrorism operations for the US Navy. All these units were overseen by the Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC, which was created by the US military to take control of these various counterterrorism units. Almost all of Delta Force's missions since have been kept highly classified. Members of the public may never know just how many operations they've been involved in since the late 70s. However, information pertaining to a select few have been made available to the public, albeit with somewhat limited details. In fact, Delta Force's operations are so secretive that any former or retired member of the unit faces a prison sentence if they are ever to speak openly about its operations. That being said, let's look at some of the ones we do know about. Operation Desert Storm, which took place in the early months of 1991, was the combat phase of the Gulf War in Iraq. This conflict involved a US-led coalition of 35 countries battling the forces of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. During Desert Storm, Delta Force was deployed to the region to offer support for coalition forces. They also provided security detail to General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was the commander of the US Central Command at the time, meaning he was charged with leading all forces of the huge coalition against Saddam Hussein. Additionally, Delta Force worked in conjunction with the fellow Special Forces unit that had inspired their foundation, the SAS. Together, the SAS and Delta Forces hunted for Scuds, a type of tactical ballistic missile that was created during the years of the Cold War by the Soviet Union, then exported to numerous countries. Eventually, Delta Force sniper teams uncovered 26 Scud missiles in western Iraq that Saddam had intended to launch at Israel. Using 50 caliber sniper rifles from 3,000 yards away, that's the same distance as 30 football fields, Delta Force operatives shot at the fuel tanks beneath the missiles, killing the crews manning these deadly weapons. If these Scuds had been launched, Saddam Hussein would have lured Israel into conflict and caused an untold number of deaths. Even worse, it would have destroyed the coalition set against them, as other Arab nations would have never accepted Israel as a partner. More recently, the Delta Force took part in Operation Kayla Mueller in October of 2019. This raid that took place in Syria resulted in the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, known terrorist and leader of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, also known as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, but perhaps best known as ISIS or ISIL. Baghdadi played a hand in a number of the atrocities and violations of human rights committed by the ISIL group, and Delta Force played a pivotal role in his death, acting alongside fellow U.S. Special Forces units such as the 75th Ranger Regiment and the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment under the command of the JSOC. The raid was carried out based on intelligence gathered by the CIA's Special Activities Division. 8 helicopters were launched well after midnight on a course for a compound located in the Idlib province of Syria, close to the Turkish border, where Baghdadi was said to be housed. Delta Force teams, along with their fellow Special Forces counterparts, arrived on the scene and attempted to convince the ISIS leader to surrender. However, Baghdadi was unwilling to compromise with U.S. forces. Delta Force entered the compound by detonating a large hole on one side, gaining access. The forces inside either surrendered or were shot and killed by Delta Force. After 2 hours, Baghdadi fled to a nearby tunnel. However, it led to a literal dead end, as shortly afterwards he detonated a suicide vest, killing himself as well as 2 of his own children. As a result of their highly secretive but vitally important missions, Delta Force maintains a natural rivalry with the other well-known U.S. Special Forces unit, the United States Navy SEALs, specifically the widely known SEAL Team 6. Both have been instrumental in large-scale conflicts over the past few years, with Delta Force playing its key role in Iraq and SEAL Team 6 being heavily involved in the war in Afghanistan. Both units are also responsible for missions that have involved high-value targets. In Iraq, Delta Force captured and is rumored to have also assassinated Saddam Hussein, while the Navy SEALs famously eliminated Osama bin Laden, leader of al-Qaeda, in May of 2011. However, it was surrounding this particular operation that some of the rivalry between Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 began to arise. Naturally, both units were eager to be granted the mission to go after bin Laden. given that he was the most wanted man in the world at the time. As it turned out, the mission was given to SEAL Team 6, which caused complaints among the members of Delta Force. They believed that the Navy SEALs had been favored for the mission to eliminate bin Laden due to the naval officers that had formed the command of the JSOC that oversees both Delta Force and the SEALs. Shortly after Operation Neptune Spear and the death of bin Laden, a top-secret, highly classified list was leaked to the press. While it was never published, this list was believed to have included names of all the soldiers who had been involved in the raid on the compound in Abbottabad, where bin Laden was found. While it seemed like a member of Delta Force may have done this out of spite, Delta Force themselves believed the leak was the result of SEAL Team 6 attempting to bask in the spotlight and attract media attention for the mission, out of spite for their Delta rivals. Like a lot of issues surrounding this clandestine group of elite soldiers, to say anything more would be pure speculation. One of the rare times that Delta Force has been caught on video was during the 2013 abduction of Al-Qaeda leader Nazi Abdul Ahmed al-Rakai. In the video, Nazi Abdul Ahmed al-Rakai is seen pulling up to his home after morning prayers, only to be immediately snatched by Delta Force operatives. This is Delta Force's version of Gone in 60 Seconds. Something else the Delta Force is known for is their use of state-of-the-art equipment when carrying out their secret operations. During Operation Kayla Mueller, a photo surfaced of a team of Delta Force operatives with their faces redacted to maintain their secrecy and showcase some of their arsenal. The Delta Force favors the ENVG-3 model of night vision goggles when locating threats in the dark, which are designed to be connected with the weapon's optical sights, allowing for soldiers to aim at targets without having to shoulder their rifle, and can switch between night vision and thermal imaging when necessary. In addition to the ENVG-3s and Kevlar-plated body armor to protect against bullets at close range, Delta Force troops also carried the deadly HK-416 carbine rifles, a weapon designed by Heckler & Koch that can utilize a wide array of attachments, including grenade launchers. As well as those mean rifles, Delta Force members carry a sidearm, most commonly favoring Glocks, Colt M1911s, or Beretta M9 pistols. None of us know all that much about Delta Force because when the military really wants to keep something secret, it tends to remain secret. Perhaps we should all just be glad they're there, helping us from the shadows with high-tech equipment and battle-honed combat techniques. If ever you happen to end up seeing these guys in action up close and personal, one thing is clear: you're either a hostage or a very dangerous individual. Just as in the case of figures like Saddam Hussein or Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, not as dangerous as them. Check out What are the most elite special forces in the world and Special Forces Assault on Iran Embassy Operation Nimrod for more of the world's most elite soldiers.